Hi, this is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy, and I'm here today with Derrick Townsend, and we're going to discuss his research and his family. So, welcome, Derrick. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
So, first question, of course, is Townsend's not an Italian name, so I'm going to assume it's your mom who's Italian.
You would be correct. Yeah, yeah, that's true. Her maiden name was Franco.
Where did you grow up?
I currently live in Michigan, and I've grown up in Michigan my entire life. Although my mother is from Connecticut originally.
Oh, okay. What part of Michigan?
Well, I grew up in a town called Mount Morris, which is a suburb of Flint, the infamous Flint, Michigan.
Oh, wow.
And then I went off to college. Yeah, went off to college, and I currently live in Portage, which is on the west side of Michigan, near Kalamazoo.
Oh, nice. Yeah. And I I've been to Detroit a few times, and I'll tell you one of the most beautiful places I've ever been was the Upper Peninsula. It was just so nice. Now I'm
Oh
going
yeah,
back 50 years now, so it was just like being in another world coming from New York City.
yeah. In fact, my wife and I just took a road trip, and we took a week and just drove through the UP and went over to Wisconsin. And yeah, it is very nice to visit up there.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. And I actually have cousins in Wisconsin. My first cousin, she's much older than me, or was. Uh, she went to college there and stayed in Wisconsin, and our kids who all grew up there and everything. So it's like a part of the family that's just moved away. Boy, probably 70 years or something from New York City.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
wow.
And again, she went to college. I guess she met her husband, and that was that. Uh, so, where's your mom's family from in Italy?
So they're from the region of Campania, and that was part of the mystery for me is where exactly were they from, which I discovered through my research. But they're from a little town called Faicchio, which is about an hour northeast of Naples.
Okay, yeah. What's the big town where that's near? Is there any big towns near there?
Well, it's in the I guess the Stato of Benevento,
Oh, okay.
and Naples is probably the largest town that's nearby. All the towns around it are fairly small, just like that town is. Casano Mutri is right near there. I don't know if you've heard of that, but yeah, they're it's kind of in the middle, down the spine of the boot, away from Naples, and so there's not a whole lot out there.
So what prompted you to do your research?
Well, when I was much younger, I think I was about 10 years old. My great grandfather passed away on my father's side, so the non-Italian side of my family, and in the process of going through his stuff, my grandfather and my father ended up going through a box of papers and letters and things like that, photos that had been given to my great grandfather from his brother, Clyde Townsend. And in the process, we discovered that Clyde had been researching the family history of my father's side, the Townsend line. And so I kind of caught the genealogy bug way back then when I was just, a young boy. And my father and I would often sit at the computer together, and I would read things off of documents. He would enter them into, genealogy software and so forth. And so I've always been interested in genealogy. And then, of course, I grew up, went to college, had a family, and wasn't able to really do much with it for a long time. Of course, my father, his focus was on his side of the family, trying to fill in those gaps, although he did a little bit of work on my mom's side. But then what really sparked my interest recently was in 2019, my daughter spent a semester abroad in Rome, study abroad program. And while she was there, my wife and I went over and visited her. And so, after that trip, I was just like, wow, I really want to know more about mom's side of the family. Where are they exactly from in Italy? And, for instance, I didn't even know how many siblings my grandfather had, her father. And he did have several siblings, which I wasn't aware of. I'd heard names tossed out over the years, Uncle Pat, Uncle John, but I didn't really know these people. And so that's what really kind of sparked the interest is after that trip, I really felt like I wanted to, just know more. because I just loved the experience in Italy.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic place to visit.
And that's something to be able to have known your great grandfather. That's pretty good. Nowadays it's not, I guess maybe not as unusual, but back then my paternal grandfather passed away when I was like 3 months old. Um, and he was in his 60s. So that's pretty neat to be able to do that. And then from your daughter to be able to spend a semester in Italy, that's fantastic. That must have been such a great experience
Yeah.
for her.
Yeah, the funny thing about it is that was the second time she had been to Italy. It was on my bucket list for a long time. Ever since I did, learned that my mother's family was Italian, I was like, oh, I'd love to go to Italy. She went when she was in middle school with a choral group, and they traveled around and performed in various cathedrals and stuff. And then she went on study abroad, and I was like, gosh darn it, if she's over there twice, I haven't been yet. It's time for us to go. And so we went and visited her, and then traveled around a bit. And yeah, like I said, it just reinvigorated my interest in finding out more about my mom's family.
So now, what did you find out about your mom's family?
Well, just about everything. um, you know, the first thing I did, which turned out to be a great resource, was I knew that my mother and my father were had connected and had been connected with a bunch of my mother's cousins over the years. My mom and dad had traveled to Connecticut several times and had sort of mini family reunions with them and things like that. Of course, this was about the time that I was in college and busy, and I couldn't go with them most of these times. And so, and then they were connected through many of them through Facebook. And so I thought, let's create a Facebook group where we can all kind of connect, and I can kind of ask questions, and people can provide information. Well, one thing that happened out of that was one of my mom's cousins who lives in the Carolinas sent me some photocopies from a photo album that his mother had. So his mother would have been my mom's aunt, and all these photos of all the family. And so this is when I really got to see all of the siblings of my grandfather. And along with the photos, there were notations from my mother's aunt about the photos, different things. And so there were some interesting finds in there. One of them was a picture of one of my mom's uncles who had an Indian motorcycle back in the day. And his brother, my mom's other uncle, borrowed it, and I ended up getting into an accident and smashing it up. And I found out from the notations on the photographs that had been written is that this argument caused them never to speak to one another ever again. And I told my mom about this, and she said, well, that makes a lot of sense, because every time we were at family functions, they were never there together. One was there or the other one was there, but never them together at the same time. And she's like, I always wondered why that was. So that was one interesting story, and I just chalk it up to sort of the Italian temper that they just couldn't forgive each other. They got in a heated argument and said, "I'm never speaking to you," and they didn't. So,
well, that's like the seating at an Italian wedding,
Yeah, right.
who can't be near this person? Who can't be near that person?
Yeah, make sure you put people away from each other who might have disagreements, right? So, and another thing I discovered through this that's more personal as far as my direct ancestors is my grandfather. Along with these photos I got from my mom's cousin, there was a picture in one of them of my grandfather, and the notation said something to the effect of, "This is the woman he was supposed to marry." And then he went off to the war. He served in World War II. He went off to the war. When he came back, she had married somebody else. And so it was a mystery to me who the woman was. And I asked my mother, I asked my aunt, who's her older sister, do you guys know anything about this? And neither one of them knew anything about it. Well, come to find out, just last year, I was showing some of these photographs to my mother's oldest cousin, who I think she just turned 84 in November. And so she was kind of around at that time. She said, I think that's a woman named, she went by Dot, but her name was Dorothy. She says, I think that's Dorothy. Well, the story the interesting thing about it is that when my great grandparents were, when my great grandmother was getting ill right before she died, Dorothy was hired by the family to kind of take care of her. I guess, you know, her family had been a friend of the family and so forth. And after my grandmother passed away, my grandfather got remarried. He remarried to Dorothy. So it kind
Wow.
of came full circle because this photo was from like 1942. And then he ended up marrying, eventually marrying her in the 70s. And I was like, oh my gosh, well, that makes total sense because the families were friends of one another and they probably were around each other very often and all those sorts of things. The other interesting thing about that photo is that down in the corner, there's a little watermark or like an embossment of the photography studio. And the name of the photography studio is Petrucci. And that's my great grandmother's maiden name. Well, come to find out, that photo and the photo studio was owned by her brother. He was a photographer. And so that was kind of interesting too, because here I had this photo of my grandfather that was taken by essentially his uncle. So that was kind of neat as well. You know, you don't really notice that until you, when I first looked at the photo, obviously I'm looking at the people, but then down in the corner, I see this Petrucci and I'm like, wow, what's that about? So.
We'll be right back.
Experience Italy like never before, traveling with a scheduled group or create your own bespoke tour with friends with PhilItaly.com. Pack your bags and follow Phil. That's www.philitaly.co. Yeah, and I have a photo of my grandmother from I think probably about 1900, and it says, and this is from Naples, and the photographer's name was Prisco, Prisco, and I've never been able to make the connection, but I did see on some birth and death records from Italy that name Prisco. So it was probably some sort of family friend or somebody, because to have a photo from Italy in 1900, that's not easy. To actually have it, to find it. But yeah, like I said, I was never been able to kind of put that connection together. But I come from a family of photographers. My father was a photographer for the Daily News, and my cousin worked there, and my other cousin worked for another newspaper, and my father's cousin's husband worked for a newspaper in New York City. So we have photos floating all over the place. And some of my dad's photos from the 50s and 60s are really quite amazing. So now when you were in Italy, did you get to be able to go to the hometown?
Unfortunately, no, because at that time I didn't know the name of the town. As I said, that trip kind of sparked my, reinvigorated me into wanting to know more. And so when it was between that time and now when I kind of found that out, I think it was, during the COVID shutdown, I had a lot of free time. And so I did a lot of, research. And I went on the Antonati website and I was able to find my great grandmother's birth registration. And I was able to confirm it was her based on the date, obviously the name, but also, how they notate the marriages in the margin.
Yeah.
And it listed my great grandfather's name as well as the marriage date. And so I was able to put those pieces together to confirm that I had found her specific birth registry. And it was from the town of Faicchio. Now, the interesting thing about it was the family always said, well, she was from Naples and he was from Genoa. And while she may have immigrated from Naples, that's not obviously where she was originally from, but I'm still kind of on the hunt for his information. And some of the family seems to think that he was adopted. So he could have perhaps been a foundling or something like that. So I don't know how successful I will be in finding his information, but I am planning, along with some of my mother's family, to travel to Italy next year. Next fall. And so we're planning to go to Faicchio at that time and hopefully maybe find out some more details.
Yeah. If you're there and you could go to the community, you might find something. But I'll send you the links. I also have, there's a couple of people that I know that kind of can help, and they do it for free. And they could kind of help with, maybe the foundling part. Because
Yeah.
that's difficult to find if they're foundling because the names aren't recorded anywhere. So,
Yep. Yep.
um,
And it's hard because his name was Michele Angelo Franco. Well, those names in that region are fairly common. And so I found several, Michele Francos or Angelo Francos or Michele Angelo Francos that could be him, but it's, I'm just not 100% sure. So not all of the information necessarily matches up. So I'm not convinced that I found it yet.
right. Yeah, I know what you mean. And you have to find that, that one particular document that links everything together.
Yeah.
So now do you know why they came to America?
Um, I don't. And they were married in Italy before they came. They got married in Faicchio. And I don't really know why they came. I suspect, and some of the family, some of my mother's cousins, some of the older ones say that, he came with some of the rest of his family. Obviously, her brother came because he was in Rhode Island. He was the photographer. And so they had other family members that came with them at the time. And so, the only thing I can figure is they came right around the turn of the century, which was from my understanding, there was a high volume of people from southern Italy immigrating to the United States, and so that probably was just one of the people or one of the groups of people that did that at that time, just because of the economic conditions and so forth in Italy. I do know that in around 1912, so my great grandmother had a baby that died as an infant in 1911. Around 1912, she went back to Italy with the three youngest siblings of my grandfather and stayed for some time. And then he went over there and then they all came back. And the story that I get is that she was just so distraught over losing the baby that she went back to be with her family. And then he went over and then they came back. And they came back, I think, in 1912. I believe that's when it was. I'd have to look to verify, but so they did make one after they were here. They made one trip back over there.
That's interesting that they went back and spent a few more years and then came back again. But I guess, like you said, that it was rough over there, and maybe they just couldn't make ends meet. So now, have you done DNA tests?
Well, I had my uncle do the DNA testing. What I've read about it is you always want the oldest generation and preferably a male. But unfortunately, I haven't been able to find anything. I found some things on my great grandmother's side, the Petrucci side, but not on the Franco side. And the next step that I'm thinking about doing with the DNA with my uncle is because I did it through Ancestry, and I understand that there's is it MyHeritage is the one that's much better for European ancestry.
That's
So
good. There's another good one too that I've done that not too many people over here do. It's called Living DNA, and they're based in Switzerland. Now, Italians or basically Europeans don't do a lot of DNA testing. They don't really believe in it. But what I liked about Living DNA is I don't know if MyHeritage does it or not, but Living DNA does, your maternal and paternal sides.
right.
And they give you a look back 1200 or 1300 or something like that. And what was really interesting is getting the haplogroups for your maternal DNA and your paternal DNA, because you'd be surprised. It's not what you think it's going to be when you get it. My mom, for example, they're from Torito and Bari, and her maternal line is almost 95% from the Caucasus.
Wow.
I can't figure, there's no logic behind it. The only thing I know, I remember that my grandmother would tell the family that her family was originally from France, but there's no proof or evidence of any of that. So we really can't be sure. But she said it, so somebody somewhere along the line said it. But like I said, the haplogroup points back all the way back to the Caucasus. So you might want to look into Living DNA too, and see what see if you like what they have to offer. The other one that I've done, and they don't do the test, but you could send your results there, is My True Ancestry. And what they do is they go to all these archaeological digs and they get the DNA from there.
Oh,
and
wow.
then they match your DNA to these archaeological digs. So it's pretty interesting to see where they come from. And I know it's, I know it's accurate because I've done it. My wife has done it. My two children are adopted and they've done it, and everything is, they're all completely different. It's not like they're just, making stuff up. It doesn't appear to anyway. But that's another cool one to do. And they have levels. I think to do the first level, it might be free. And then if you want more information, of course, like any other good business, they're going to keep charging you until you get to what you want. But,
Yeah, they get you hooked on the free and then they charge you.
Yeah, exactly. So now I have to ask you, what have you found out about your dad's side?
Well,
Because I'm assuming Townsend's English. Yeah, that's an English name.
yeah,
Yeah.
so his father's side is English, mostly, with some French, and his mother's side is mostly German. So I kind of cut across the continent of Europe between Britain, France, Germany, and Italy. Right down the middle of the continent. But yeah, so he's done a lot of work on that side of the family. And I have all that information. My father passed away in 2020, and when he did, I told my mother, I said, don't touch anything, because at that time she wasn't terribly interested in genealogy. I said, don't touch anything. I will take it all. I will handle it. Don't get rid of anything, because she's the kind of person who's like, I don't want to, let's clutter in here. Let's just throw it out. And I'm like, don't throw anything away. And luckily she did. She said, okay, I will save it for you. And so I got all that. So I'm actually in the process right now of kind of sorting through, I have his computer, and I have his GEDCOM files and all that. So I'm good from that perspective. But right now I'm sorting through all the, ephemera and photos and documents and things, and trying to digitize things that he hadn't already digitized. So, but yeah, he did a lot of work. Clyde, his great uncle was a member of the Masons. And I think that, that he, what little I know about that, he probably started that as part of, being part of the Masons, because I actually got some information from them recently about Clyde, but he had written all across the country to different people. I found out we have family in Washington and the Buffalo, New York area, and distant relatives. My dad was able to trace our family on that side back quite a ways, back to colonial America. And our family was in the United States in the 17th century. So, much past that, obviously the information is questionable without being verified, but he's gotten documentation for most of it up to that point.
Yeah, and I bet you when you start going through it, you're going to find something, because if they hear that long, they had to have. It's very possible that they tie back to a gateway ancestor or something like that you could trace through England. My daughter's case, she met her birth parents. I guess it was about 8 years ago or something like that. And her birth father, same thing, similar. I was able to get him all the way back, very far back, in fact, to England. And she's a direct from Daniel Boone and Captain Morgan.
Wow.
Captain Morgan the pirate. Now, I didn't know that Daniel Boone is a descendant of Captain Morgan the pirate.
Oh, wow. I didn't
know that. Yeah, I didn't know that. And she's actually goes back to the Despenser family, Princess Di's family in England. So she's a very distant cousin from that family. But what was really interesting as I was going through it, I came across this Italian family in England in King Henry's court, King Henry VIII's court, the Bassano brothers. And they were originally from, I think, Florence. They were musicians. And there's three brothers. They were musicians in King Henry's court. And her, great grandfather married an English woman, of course, because who else are you going to marry in England? And so she's descendant from this Italian Bassano brother going back to King Henry VIII's court. So, as you go through it, you may luck out and find some kind of hook there. And I actually started looking back to my ex-wife's family because I had a feeling that they had gone back far. And she actually has some Dutch roots. And I don't know if you're familiar with Rikers Island in New York, but
Oh, yeah.
yeah. So her third or fourth great grandfather, Dutch, the name was von Ricken or something like that. And they actually owned Rikers Island and sold it to New York City in the early 1800s.
Oh, wow.
And I kind of had that sense because, most of Long Island was owned by either Dutch or English going back. And
Right.
again, same
sense.
thing.
Yep.
Yeah. Once I found that hook, and I found them in Hempstead, and I found them in all those English areas. And they own farms on Long Island and various places out there. So hopefully, you'll find some really neat hook that gets you back to England or Germany. Same thing with her. I got her German. Her father was German. Her mother was English and Irish. So similar to you.
Mhm.
And I got her German back to like 1400 or something like that.
Wow.
So it was pretty interesting to find that. And the Germans actually have the Germans, the Dutch, the Swiss actually have some pretty good records going back in time.
Yeah, I've gotten in a little bit into the German records just as I've been, kind of exploring my paternal grandmother's side. And yeah, they have quite a bit of stuff going quite a ways back. I was actually surprised with all the the turmoil in Germany, how much is persisted.
Yeah, well, apparently those countries were keeping records before Napoleon. Italy didn't keep civil records until Napoleon came around.
Right, that's what I understand. Yeah.
Yeah,
I thought originally I had thought, oh well, that makes Napoleon must have spread this practice across Europe, but I learned a while back that wasn't necessarily the case, but it was the case in Italy. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have Swiss records going back to like 1350 or thereabouts, and they're handwritten trees that apparently some of the prominent families in Lucerne, they either conscripted or they just did it. I have a feeling it was a planned thing because when you look at the records, they're all the same way. They're all on the same type of like paper and all set up exactly the same way. So either historically somebody said we need to start this for all of these families, but that's kind of what I found out. So what does your family think about this? My family thinks I'm nuts. What does your family think?
Well, I think most of the family at this point in time, all of my grandfather's siblings are gone. They've all passed away. So I think back to that and I think, man, I wish that we had done this before I lost my grandfather, because I'm sure he has a wealth of knowledge and a bunch of stories and stuff like that. He actually, kind of getting off track here, but he actually was awarded a Purple Heart during World War II, and I'd love to hear his stories about his time in the service and things like that. But so all of the next generation down, my mother's generation, and all of her cousins seem to be Actually quite interested. My wife and I traveled out to Connecticut last fall to visit a bunch of them, and I, of course, I brought, what I had been working on and things I had discovered, and they were really, really interested. And that's kind of what prompted the group of us to say, hey, let's take a trip together to Italy, so and go to the village where their grandparents were from, my great grandparents. And so, yeah, I was actually pleasantly surprised, and happy that they did show that much interest. And people have been willing to share, documents and photos and things with me, which is great. I'm willing to collect as much as they're willing to share. So, and I think now that they know that I'm interested, that, every once in a while I get an email or something from one of them saying, hey, I just came across this, thought you might be interested. So that's great. And many of them, didn't know some of the things that I've uncovered. They didn't know, most of them, where their grandparents were from. They knew they were from Italy, and that was about it. The family lore was Genoa and Naples. That was the extent of what they knew. So I think they've been, interested in finding out more of the details as we, drill down and dig down into the fine details of the family. So it's been great to be able to share it with them.
Yeah, and I was lucky because I guess it's probably five or 6 years ago now that I came across a cousin in Italy, a fourth cousin in Italy, who was actually researching my paternal grandmother. And she started a group thinking, because the family was originally from Spain back in the 1500s, thinking she was going to find people in South America or Spain. She had no idea that we were here. That some of the family, at least two people anyway, came to America. And so she's been just a fabulous help in helping me piece things together and find other parts of the family. And I say this in a lot of the podcasts. Facebook, for all its bad side, when you're researching family, it's really such a wonderful tool to be able to connect and either search the names or put in the hometowns, because there's always somebody out there willing to help.
Yeah. I mean, to that point, like I said, I created the Facebook group for our family, and then I thought, I wonder, what kind of Facebook groups might be out there from Italy. And so I started searching, and there are a handful of Facebook groups for different, functions or groups or interests in Faicchio. In fact, there's even like a tourism board, I guess you would call it, in Faicchio that has a Facebook page. And so, I follow all of those to try and get, the goings on, what's happening there. And every time there's a new post, I'm always scanning the names. Is there a familiar name in here? Because I'm trying to, unfortunately, the connections for us have been lost over time. And so I'm trying to find, if there's possibly somebody in Faicchio that's a distant relation that I could connect with. So far, nothing yet. But and I keep hoping. I have this dream. Of course, I'm realistic that this probably won't happen, but I have this dream that we'll go to Faicchio and we'll walk the street, where she was born, and somebody will come out of a building and say, hey, what are you doing here? And we'll find out that they're a distant relation,
It happens.
I've heard of those stories, but.
Yeah, I've interviewed several people who said that. The most amazing one was, they were walking down the street in the hometown, and this old woman says, who are you? And so he tells them that he's from there. And she says, come with me. And she takes this key out of her pocket, and they go into this chapel for Saint Lucy, who's the patron saint of eyes, right? And they go in this chapel, and there's all these artifacts from all over the world around the statue, which originally, the way I understood the story was, people would send that, and they were supposed to be used to upkeep the chapel and all of that. But instead, they just left everything there. And the woman tells them, you're supposed to pick up something and put it toward your eyes, like to bless your eyes, right?
Mm.
And he picks it up and he says, I don't believe this. So Alessandro from the genealogist who was helping him said, don't believe what? And he said, this has my great grandparents' names on
Wow.
it. I've heard, and that's just one. I've heard several where people just walking down the street or they're in a bar and they'll ask who they are, or somebody will just say, this is my last name. Do you know anybody from that family? And all of a sudden people are coming out of the woodwork. So don't discount it. You might be there.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I could also put you in touch with somebody that, if you want to have a little bit more of an experience when you get there, they could help you do that too. I mean, we just saw trip was just over the top. I had gone 25 years ago. I didn't know anything back then. And we had to postpone twice because of COVID. And we finally got to go in June. And even if you don't know anybody there, the people are just so wonderful. They treat you like gold. As soon as you tell them, this is my grandmother's hometown, everything changes,
Yeah.
because they love the fact that we want to be there. And it's a whole different world. It really is. It's an incredibly different world.
Yeah, the atmosphere over there, I mean, when we were over there before, we went to some areas that weren't necessarily big touristy areas. And, we went to a farm in Tuscany and had lunch and stuff. And the people are just amazing. And, I can't wait to, get a little bit out of, Naples and get out to the country and meet those people out there, just, and walk the streets, like you say.
Yeah. And now see, and in my case, my grandmother, I didn't get to go to my mom's home and body. I hope we're going to get there. But my grandmother actually grew up in Naples, in the city of Naples. So as I'm in Naples and I'm walking down these streets, or you go to the Duomo, that she was there.
Right. Right.
And so it's just a completely different feeling.
To that point, there's a church in Faicchio. It's the Church of Santa Maria Assunta. My mother's aunt, her birth name was Maria Assunta Franco, and so I'm like, is that a clue that that's the church that her family attended? When they were there. That's one of the things I want to explore while we're there. Do they have any record of the family? I think there's 3 or 4 churches in town, but that one particularly, is a flag for me just because of the name connection. But
yeah, and I would say, yeah, that's probably a good clue. That's probably a good place to start anyway. Because if they named her that, there's probably there has to be some sort of connection to that church.
That's what I'm wondering. So.
And there's St. Mary Assunta's all over Italy, I found out.
Well, I'm sure of that. But when I found out there was one in Faicchio where she was born, or where her mother was born, I thought, that might be a clue. But, maybe not. Who knows? But it's something to explore. So.
No, I would say that's a safe bet and certainly a good clue. Well, listen, this has been fun. I really appreciate you taking the time. If there's anything that I could do to help you, just holler, or if there's something that you need to know about a trip to Italy, I could help you with that. I hope too.
Yeah, no, thank you for that offer. We're starting to formulate our plans now, so maybe I will be asking for some clues on how to do things. But Bob, I just want to say thanks for having me, and I've been following you for a while, and I really enjoy the stuff that you create and put out to help all of us, and just want to say thanks for opening it up for some of us to talk to you. So this is great.
All right, well, thank you. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.